Hello, class, and welcome to our lecture on strategic partnerships. I'm going to provide a broad overview of the concept of government partnerships, what these partnerships look like, and some of the key things you should think about as you start to develop these partnerships. To start, I'd like to cover the concepts of iron triangles and issue networks. These concepts are often covered in an American government course or an introductory course in public administration, but I think it bears a review as these concepts are directly applicable to our discussion today. In my experience, both concepts accurately reflect how strategic partnerships are developed in the public sector. They merely represent adjustments in scope and objective, which I will explain. Iron triangles represent a very common and prevalent approach to strategic partnerships in government. This concept describes an alliance between bureaucrats, legislative staff, and interest groups that oftentimes operate in an apolitical environment, meaning that these interactions on some level are between subject matter experts from each of those areas and do not necessarily involve the elected politicians directly. Now, that is not to say that elected politicians and respective leaders of the involved organizations do not participate in the process, but often that participation is indirect and tangential to the staff work that occurs on a given topic. I'll offer a real life example that's relatively recent to demonstrate this interaction. In 2021, the U.S. House of Representatives passed what is known as the Carroll Act. This was passed in a bipartisan manner and is focused on cardiovascular health conditions. You can Google it if you're interested in the details. During the drafting of the legislation, a key non-governmental partner with my division worked closely with congressional staff to develop the bill language. Once a draft bill is completed, this language was shared with my team for two reasons. First, our nonprofit and congressional partners wanted to ensure that the proposed activities were reasonable and achievable by CDC. Second, our partners wanted to know how much it would cost to support the activities described in the bill. We worked with these legislative partners to fine-tune the bill language to reflect the existing science and better define the activities described in the bill, and we provided our best estimate for what those activities would cost in terms of new appropriations. These efforts by and large occurred at a staff level with little to no direct involvement from elected congressional sponsors, CDC's agency leadership, nor the upper leadership of the nonprofit partner. As I stated, the bill was passed in the House and it is expected to pass in the Senate and signed into law. If this occurs, you'll have a new bill largely developed by non-elected subject matter experts that could possibly generate a significant increase in resources to CDC over the next 2 to 3 years. This approach is very common, happens every day across all levels of government, and reflects how strategic partnerships function at its simplest level. Now, issue networks, as I stated earlier, are also an accurate representation of strategic partnerships that involve government. It's just in a broader, more complicated scope. So while iron triangles are typically very small and focused endeavors with very focused and narrow goals, issue networks tend to be broader in scope with more expansive goals in mind. Again, I will offer a real-life example that I participated in from 2018 to the present. In 2018, my boss decided that she wanted to develop an innovative approach to talking about and finding solutions for hypertension issues in the United States. Specifically, she wanted to identify ways to improve the rates of hypertension control, which were and are now less than 50% in our society. In response, me and my team organized 2 partner convening meetings in 2019 to bring together and engage traditional and non-traditional partners for an initial discussion. These meetings included traditional partners like the American Health Association and non-traditional partners from academia, insurance companies, and private businesses, Blue Cross Blue Shield being one of those examples. At the conclusion of these meetings, CDC joined with these partners to form the National Hypertension Control Roundtable. The cross-cutting roundtable from all sectors of our society agreed to come together and work collectively on this health challenge. These efforts were further boosted by the establishment of the Federal Hypertension Leadership Council, a collection of federal health agencies interested in and committed to improving hypertension control rates. This leadership council was born out of a Surgeon General's call to action on hypertension control, issued at the end of the last administration in 2020, and spearheaded and staffed by CDC. All these efforts are informally linked through my division at CDC and are focused on multiple approaches to addressing the hypertension control effort. These include policy changes like encouraging the use of self-measured blood monitors and improving access to health education information through another partnership my division and the private sector focused on that brought $11+ million in private funding to my division. So you can see there's a whole lot of different elements involved in that type of issue network. And that doesn't even really go into the media engagement that we had, particularly around the Surgeon General's call to action. But it's all of these activities are focused on hypertension control. So a much broader network, a much bigger issue than the previous one I just discussed about the Carroll Act. So these are just two examples of the efforts that are underway within my division to address what is a broad societal issue with many partners and many moving parts. Again, the difference between the Iron Triangle and the issue network is scope and complexity, but both accurately reflect how strategic partnerships work at every level. To demonstrate the applicability of these constructs at the state and local level, I'll offer one additional example. CDC provides funding to states for health priorities and does so in what is known as a cooperative agreement format, meaning that CDC and states are dedicated to working together to address the specific health issue associated with the funding. A common approach to such an effort is to require states to build coalitions around a specific disease issue within the state. These coalitions are essentially issue networks designed to support the state activities associated with the federal funding and will typically involve public health NGOs, academic institutions, local governments, and sometimes private sector entities. The two approaches work and are utilized by state and local governments all the time and truly provide an accurate portrayal of strategic partnerships involving relationships that are many times led by government entities. Now, I typically think of partners in three buckets: policy, program, and financial. The first type, policy, are designed to both narrowly defined and broadly defined policy goals. The examples I offered in the previous slide are excellent examples of these policy-oriented partnerships. In these instances, we are working on specific policy goals, new legislation, increased appropriations, or alternatively, we're working on large-scale policy system changes, like improving hypertension control rates, that will require a number of individual policy changes to achieve that larger goal. The second type of partnership is a programmatic partnership. And this is a mutual collaboration between a government entity and an NGO or a private entity towards a mutual goal. An example of this from my current position is our Million Hearts Initiative. This is an initiative that seeks to reduce 1 million cardiovascular events in the next 5 years. The initiative is a collaboration between CDC and the Center for Medicaid Medicare Services, and it's supported by a consortium of NGOs committed to this goal. The effort in part seeks to coordinate programmatic efforts across a broad spectrum of cardiovascular health prevention activities. But there's no exchange of resources, just a commitment to coordinate and collaborate efforts between and amongst the participating partners. The partner group works together on this common issue and related goals, but does so with financial independence from each other. And then finally, there's a financial bucket of partnerships. And these can occur between and among different levels of government, between the government and NGOs, and at times between the government and the private sector. The most common example is when a level of government provides funding to another level of government through a grant. As noted earlier, CDC's approach is a cooperative agreement mechanism that serves as an agreement between CDC and a state, memorializing not only the relationship between the two organizations, but also the duties and responsibilities of each. Another example is the communications campaign my division is doing regarding cardiovascular health in the African American community. Here, CDC has entered into a partnership with 2 private and 2 non-governmental partners to produce a communications campaign, with CDC and the NGOs providing the subject matter experts and the private sector providing the funding. While this approach is certainly less common than a government agency awarding grants and cooperative agreements, it nonetheless does occur and represents a critical type of public-private partnership. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about what motivates strategic partnerships. So why do organizations look to engage in strategic partnerships with government organizations? Or conversely, why does government seek to build partnerships with non-governmental organizations? These are 2 different questions, but really we're talking about the same coin, just different sides of it. There are several overarching reasons that motivate the creation of strategic partnerships involving government agencies that generally include the following: mutual interests, issue elevation, the need to galvanize support, resource access, risk sharing, and or improved reputation. And I'm going to talk about each one in order. So achieving mutual interest is a large motivator for strategic partnerships. Private corporations have begun to incorporate shared and social investment into their bottom line. For instance, during the Zika outbreak, Home Depot and CDC worked together to develop a simple approach to controlling the outbreak. As Zika is a disease transmitted by mosquitoes, CDC and the Home Depot developed an initiative to supply relatively cheap window screens to the countries hardest hit by Zika in an effort to limit human exposure to mosquitoes. Here, Home Depot shared CDC's goals of limiting the Zika outbreak, expanding its market for window screens, and it benefited reputationally, as I'll discuss in a moment. CDC also benefited from its innovative approach to partnering and its relatively simple but innovative solution to limiting exposure, and doing all this in a relatively inexpensive manner. It also demonstrated CDC's ability to manage a health emergency in a nimble and effective manner, characteristics not always attributed to federal agencies, and in all honesty, in a bit of a short supply for the current COVID emergency. Strategic partnerships with government and notable private and non-governmental organizations also promote issue elevation. By coming together in partnership, particularly when the partnership is effectively managed, organizations can increase their visibility on the issue exponentially. And this can benefit them both reputationally and at the bottom line, either through profits if you're a private entity, or through donor participation if you're a non-governmental agency. Next, being able to elevate an issue can also serve to galvanize support in a way that generates action from both the legislative and executive branches you engage with. Decision makers in any legislative or executive body pay attention to broadly supported initiatives and are more inclined to act when support has been effectively galvanized. As John Clymer noted in our fireside chat on partnerships, the difference in local initiatives often turns on the community's support you can bring to bear to the decision makers, not a flash of an outside organization coming in and trying to tell that locality what to do. Another great example is an effort I mentioned earlier, the Surgeon General's call to action on hypertension. The efforts of the division to spotlight the national burden associated with hypertension and the need for nationwide improvement on this issue through the formation of the roundtable and the attention we were able to bring to it generated interest on the part of the Surgeon General, an executive branch leader. He recognized the science and the level of support for addressing the issue, and this is sufficient for him to dedicate his limited resources to developing and issuing the call to action. This doesn't necessarily correct the health problem, but it certainly increases our visibility on it with decision makers and makes a stronger case for further action down the road. Strategic partnerships can also increase resource access for all parties involved in a partnership. Successful partnerships can help build credibility for government agencies with decision makers, establish new allies who support the agency's mission, and eventually generate an increase in the agency's resources, either through increased appropriations or through external donations, as we've previously discussed. Further, from a private sector perspective, investing in social efforts can improve the bottom line, as discussed previously, and will be addressed again later under improving reputation. Finally, NGOs can also benefit financially from partnerships. Participating in partnerships provide NGOs with an insider's view of government efforts. Often this view provides them with the ability to compete very effectively for grants and cooperative agreements that may become available to support the issues being advanced by the partnerships. NGOs are also likely to receive a social benefit from partnering with government agencies, demonstrating their commitment and dedication to the issue, and by default giving them additional accomplishments to promote to their donor base. The next area of motivation is risk sharing. Here's where government agencies can afford to engage in riskier innovation activities without owning the entire endeavor. By serving as part of a partnership rather than going it alone, government agencies disperse the risk across all parties involved in the effort and take less of a reputational hit if the partnership fails to achieve all of its objectives. This is a great way for a government entity to look for more innovative solutions to the challenges they are charged with managing. The risk sharing also applies to other partners as well. They also have leadership teams, board of directors, shareholders, the C-suite to answer to, and can dilute the risk of an innovative effort through a strategic partnership. Finally, there's improved reputation. Improved reputation can be a strong motivator in the realm of strategic partnership. It means different things for different people depending on your perspective. In the private sector, there's plenty of data that indicates corporations benefit from investing in social impact. In other words, the bottom line seems to improve when there's an increase in efforts to have a positive social impact on society for these private sector organizations. From the government and non-governmental side of strategic partnerships, being nimble and able to leverage positions for support and assets can achieve an improved reputation for both entities, not only with the public, but also with the legislative and executive branch decision makers. Success stories that result from strategic partnerships, particularly ones that improve impact and or increase efficiency, is always something political leaders like to highlight and at times take credit for. For example, when we have our fireside chat on budget and performance, Mr. Jeff Morelli is going to discuss the support CDC received from major corporations in the revitalization of the buildings and facilities at CDC. Now, as a preview, this effort included the development of the agency's first emergency operations center that was built out with private funding from one of Atlanta's most successful business leaders. Here, the funder was able to take credit for supporting CDC, advancing its ability to manage emergencies. CDC was able to access this resource and build its reputation around emergency management in an efficient manner. And congressional leaders were able to take credit to a degree for increasing CDC's capacity to protect the nation's health without the expenditure of individual tax dollars. It was really a win-win-win for all involved. Now, the discussion about how that partnership came together to support the modernization of CDC facilities is a little bit more involved, and I'll leave the ins and outs of that to the fireside chat that you're able to review during that section of the course. Next, we want to talk about how to establish effective partnerships. And there's really several prerequisites that are required to build an effective partnership. First, one needs to be prepared to check any assumptions, perceptions, and attitudes that you may have towards your potential partners as you begin to engage with them. Now, I've discussed the Hypertension Control Roundtable previously, and I'll do so again here. So when we were in the the formative stages of developing this roundtable, my supervisor was very focused on engaging non-traditional partners in this effort. And initially, we excluded some of our traditional partners from the process. One in particular actually had access to the types of organizations we were looking towards, but was a bit challenging to work with, a reflection of attitudes and perceptions. So while this organization was challenging, the access that they were able to offer really helped us in the early stages of developing this roundtable. So we kind of had to check that attitude, that perception at the door, and allow ourselves the flexibility to engage an existing partner because they brought a lot to the table. So we dealt with some of the challenges and moved to address those issues and include them in the process, and it ended up being a very successful endeavor. You also have to ensure that all the players, whether you have 2 or 200, have a shared set of values when it comes to the focus of the effort. While one might think that all health agencies have shared values, that's not always the case. Organizational constituencies can often drive what those values are. So an association representing physicians may have differing values than a patient-focused organization. It's not bad per se, but an absence of shared values can undermine a partnership very fast. And so you need to make sure that those shared values are consistent with whoever you're partnering with on a particular issue. Next, you need to be open to the ideas of your partners. The beauty of partnering is bringing together different ideas and approaches to address a serious challenge. But the challenge is allowing yourself to get out of your box and allow that opportunity for shared ideas to thrive and generate the kind of impact that you're looking for. It's kind of a tough situation. You're between a rock and a hard place, but you need to have the flexibility to do both and be responsive to the ideas of your partners while also keeping your eye on the prize and trying to address the challenge that you're facing. Next, you want to be responsive to your partners. Deliver what you promise and provide them with what they need from the partnership when they need it. Your partners need to be able to count on you, and failing to engage and meet them with their needs will engender distrust in the relationship. And it will really undermine the effectiveness of the partnership. So you need to be as responsive as possible. Now, obviously, you're going to have demands on your time and what you can and can't do as a public official, so it has to be within those parameters, but you still can be responsive within those parameters. Similarly, you have to be as transparent and honest as possible. Don't violate the constraints you operate under as a public official, but don't government speak them either. Have open, honest conversations with them on a regular basis and confront those challenges with them head on. And how often you talk and engage them is really going to depend on the kind of partnership that you have. Some of my partners I talk to on a weekly basis. Some I talk to every other week. Some we only talk to monthly. It just depends on how involved they are and how much you need to engage them. Next, you need to give a partnership time to grow and evolve. Just like your personal lives, you don't become someone's best friend overnight. Similarly, you're not going to have a high-functioning, impactful partnership after the first initial meeting. Allow the natural development of the partnership to occur so that you can help the relationship become impactful as possible. That storming, norming, and forming phases of relationship development are important here, and you have to allow that to run its course. You really can't expect it to be hitting on all cylinders right off the bat. Finally, address any challenges head on and immediately. Don't allow miscommunications or misunderstandings to affect a partnership. Be open to difficult conversations and work through solutions to the challenges that will most assuredly occur in these relationships. A good example of this just happened with me. I had a major partner who was trying to work through someone above me to get something done, and I wasn't aware of that. And when I found out about it, it turned out that who they were trying to engage was not being responsive to them. So it created some challenges for me within my division, and it created challenges for them because they weren't getting what they wanted. So I just had a conversation with the person who was in charge of this effort, and we came up with a new communications construct that would work better for all of us, where she worked through me to get what she needed, and I could let the person above me know what was going on during my meetings with them. And that seems to have worked great, but it really took a willingness to have that hard conversation, find out where their frustrations were. That was the source of some of my frustrations, work through that, and then come to a resolution that worked for all involved. And so far, it's worked quite well. But again, I was willing to have that that difficult conversation initially because I felt like we could come to a pretty decent resolution as a result of that discussion. So what's it take to manage partnerships? So to effectively manage a partnership, you really need to have a relationship that's clearly defined from the outset. You need to answer some basic questions. What's expected from both parties? Is this partnership a short-term or a long-term relationship? Are we striving to meet big goals or are we focused on a more discrete short-term goal? In my role at CDC, I manage a large variety of partnerships. Some of these relationships are designed to support CDC with decision makers in Washington each year. These tend to be partnerships that are long-standing, historical relationships, but are focused on more immediate goals, like increasing funding. Some of these relationships are designed to be mutually supportive from a programmatic perspective. For instance, John Clymer, one of our fireside chat speakers, represents an organization that doesn't engage decision makers on funding issues directly. However, he does share common high-level public health objectives with my division, and he engages those decision makers as well as others on a regular basis. His organization provides access to important decision makers, and both the National Forum and CDC benefit from that engagement. Another example is the creation of the Hypertension Control Roundtable. Again, this was an effort that was driven by CDC and was designed to be a partnership at a high level with potentially very impactful goals. The efforts included recruitment of new and existing partners to the roundtable, and while it started as a CDC effort, it was always designed to become a self-sufficient partnership group with CDC involvement, but partners leading the vision at some point down the line. It is important to note that this was communicated to the members from the outset and shared with them over the evolution of the group. So they understood that the shared vision was a vision that CDC had a minimal role down the line. So again, what you're doing there is you're defining the relationship. CDC was going to be the initiator of this roundtable, but eventually pass leadership on to the roundtable members who would take it from there. Next, as I just alluded to, you have to have a shared vision of what the partnership is ultimately designed to achieve. As we discussed in the fireside chat, having organizations around the table without their full commitment to the vision really doesn't accomplish much and likely hurts the overall effort. No one should be afraid to walk away from a potential partnership if that shared vision is not there. And this shared vision should really be viewed as a primary prerequisite to any kind of partnership you're looking to engage in. Next, a successful partnership will need adequate resources to succeed. And in some instances, that need is mostly staff time. In fact, many of my partner interactions occur over the phone or video conference. So in-kind resources, being able to dedicate a portion of my day to a partnership activity is important, and that is an expenditure of resources on some level. At times, partnerships are going to require a little bit more than that in terms of funding and commitment. That can be in the form of travel funds, hosting meetings, that type of thing. This is a relatively small amount of expenditure, but it does keep all parties committed to each other. So for instance, prior to COVID, my division would meet face-to-face with the leadership team at the American Heart Association on an annual basis. And these meetings would alternate between Atlanta and Dallas, where the American Heart Association is headquartered. So in other words, CDC would host one, and then the next year, the American Heart Association would host the other. And this fairly simple willingness to travel and meet with partners on their own turf may seem minor, but it builds better relationships and demonstrates a commitment from each organization to the partnership and to making that partnership work. A further example is the roundtable. Now, CDC does fund this hypertension control roundtable with operating expenses right now, and that enables the roundtable to operate. And remember, it's only a couple years old, so it really needs all the help it can get at this point. Now, this represents a CDC commitment to a fledgling organization and its goals in the short term. However, the expectation is over the long term that the funding for the roundtable will be derived elsewhere. And where that is, I don't know. Again, the roundtable at this point is led by the partners, not CDC, and so that is an issue that they will at some point have to confront. And then finally, there's the concept of funded partners, and I referred to this earlier in the discussion. And in this case, your partners are also your grantees. And to be blunt, it's a very cumbersome relationship, as the partner dynamic is a bit different from the grantee-grantor relationship. This can create some very challenging dynamics for both parties. And while I don't deal with this situation much now, my most previous job at CDC had a significant number of our partners who were also supported with funding through CDC. Really created awkward engagements, sometimes a mismatch of goals and motivations, and could oftentimes be very challenging politically. It's not an ideal situation, but sometimes it's unavoidable and should be handled very carefully. I'll give you one quick example without naming names. We had a major partner who worked with us on the issue of disability, and they had been receiving funding for many, many years. And they had fairly high-profile connections in one of the parties. And at one point, we had discussed the possibility of reducing their funding. And what occurred was the leader of that organization actually called the secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, which CDC is an agency within, and raised the issue with them. And that discussion around whether to decrease funding was put on the table or put on the back burner. And so they had a lot of political access that they were willing and able to use. So that's a good example of how it can be a bit challenging to have both partners and grantees at the same time. Now, I won't go into this too much here. My next slide covers it a bit. But suffice to say that you have to have a common set of goals. And this is really, you have to have a common set of goals, and you have to have a way to evaluate those goals. And you really need to have a way to measure progress towards these goals. So having goals and an ability to evaluate, again, really to me, I view it as the same coin, just different sides. It implicates the needs from all partners. It implicates the need for all partners to be on the same page from day one. And again, this speaks to their need to report back to their leadership and let them know what they're achieving. Finally, depending on the nature of the partnership, you should always contemplate an exit strategy. You don't always need one. For instance, my division and the American Heart Association are both committed to improving heart health and preventing strokes in the U.S. And this is unlikely to change, so I suspect our organizations will always be united at that high level. However, the Heart Association has been involved in many, many more specific, narrowly focused partnerships with my division at a programmatic and scientific level. And these engagements had a limited lifespan that define a natural end to the engagement. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you come together, you achieve your objectives, it's okay to end the partnership and move on. A larger example of that is the previous mentioned roundtable. We always ensured that CDC's role would be spun down from the beginning, and it communicated that to the group. And one of the ways we did that is we designed a set of bylaws and a timeline that facilitated a reduced level of involvement by CDC at the leadership level, so that they understood that eventually the organization as a roundtable would be theirs to manage and theirs to run. Again, we set the exit strategy ahead of time and communicated that well to our partner groups. So next, let's talk about evaluation. It's a critical but overlooked aspect of partnerships. Organizations often get too caught up in the excitement of relationship building to give a lot of thought to this aspect of the relationship. Again, the nature of the relationship will define the type of evaluation one does when it comes to partnerships. For the long-standing relationships that we have, most of the evaluation efforts are internal and qualitative in nature. This includes things like frequency of engagements, responsiveness, the nature of the support, and in some instances, increased funding, although that definitely is not a primary motivation. It can also include access. For instance, there have been occasions where partner groups were permitted early access to new scientifically impactful data so that they could participate in CDC with the rollout of that data and use it to educate decision makers. This doesn't happen a lot, as it runs counter to many standard operating procedures at CDC regarding the release of data. However, when it can happen, it provides those partners with the prestige that comes with access and data promotion that reflects both the importance of the organization and its ability to partner with CDC. And they also assist CDC in disseminating the key messages of the data and ensuring maximum reach of it. So it's a bit of a boost to their reputation, and that's important to them. For more narrow and discrete engagements, there should always be a mechanism to evaluate the success or failure of an engagement and when that relationship has run its course. What those measures are should be a product of a joint effort to set those performance measures in a way that makes them manageable and useful to all organizations involved in the effort. Remember, partnerships always have someone or partners always have someone or something like a board of directors to answer to and demonstrate success. So, for example, I previously referred to that $11 million public-private partnership that we have. And this partnership involves our division, 2 pharmaceutical companies, 3 NGOs. All these partners have executive leadership, boards, and constituents to report to on how that partnership is progressing and what successes we've achieved. As such, it was a prerequisite to build in a robust evaluation component so that we could demonstrate the impact of this effort on public health. Information that can and will be used to demonstrate how effective those expenditures were for all the organizations participating in the effort. So whenever possible, you should build in an evaluation plan. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a complicated quantitative evaluation plan. It can be qualitative, but it should be something that all the partners agree to and are willing to contribute to and participate in. So some quick final thoughts on partnerships. Partnerships are, when all is said and done, relationships. And while there's an organizational dynamic there for sure, the success or failure of it often turns on how individuals engage with each other. So keeping this construct in mind, you should follow some simple common sense rules for building strong partnerships. First and foremost, always be honest. It's truly the best policy. As government officials, we can't always tell our partners everything, but we can be transparent with them. Tell them what you can and clearly define what you cannot talk about. Sharing information in this way will generate trust in you and ensure that you're both heading in the right direction. And this is an excellent foundation for partnerships. Again, they're going to understand that you can't tell them everything. But if you tell them what you can, you're really going to build some trust. Be realistic about what you're looking for in a partnership. I've always tried to live the mantra under promise and over deliver, and I think this is an essential approach for partnerships. Everyone wants to change the world in a stunning way. But as we alluded to in the innovation section, the most impactful changes are often small and incremental changes or innovations over time. In this instance, when you're building a partnership, use that SMART approach to setting goals. Specific, measurable, time-sensitive, reasonable, and achievable. Make sure you use this SMART approach and that everybody is comfortable with the goals that you've set as a partnership group. And in the end, if everyone's comfortable with that approach and agrees to the direction you're taking, chances are that partnership is going to be successful at some level. Next, be reliable in your role as a partner. If you say you can deliver X by a certain date, make sure you deliver X by a certain date. If you can't, then refer back to honesty in the realistic discussion we just had. Failing to deliver on your end of a partnership can seriously undermine trust and could spell the end of a partnership, even if it continues on paper. So be honest and realistic with your partners in a partnership group. If you can't deliver X by a certain date, let them know. If you can deliver it by a different date, then let them know that. If X isn't possible right now, but Y and Z are, and X is down the line, then tell them that. Just be honest and realistic about what you can bring to the partnership. Next, be direct when you communicate with your partners. Over time, as public servants, we develop an approach to communications that can be very circumspect. We say a lot of words without saying a whole lot of substance. When you're in partnerships, you need to avoid this. Again, there may be limits to what you can say about a given topic, but where partnership issues arise, be direct with them and keep those communication lines as open and transparent as possible. This will sometimes result in difficult and awkward conversations, but as with your personal relationships, these challenging conversations often lead to a better relationship overall, and partnerships are no different. You need to have some of those tough conversations in order to move the partnership to the next level. Finally, nurture the relationship both individually and organizationally. The example I used previously about including them in science releases is a great example of nurturing the partner organization, so I won't go into that too much here. Just be mindful that you can help contribute to their reputation as an organization, and that's one way to do it. So look for opportunities to do that. On an individual level, try to nurture your partner contacts. Treat them as human beings. Get to know them, help them where you can, demonstrate some empathy towards them and their challenges. Do you need to be their friend? No, not necessarily. But if that happens, all the better. Try to leave your ego at the door as a government official and treat them as an equal in this relationship. And that'll go a long way to nurturing the relationship that you have through a partnership situation. As always, thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know through email or texting me or calling me. Thanks again.